I'm recording and I'm going to open it up. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
How are we all doing?
Good.
Trying to not melt.
Beautiful day outside. Can't wait to wear a mask and stay inside.
It's a warm one.
Yeah.
Very, very warm one. All right. For people that might be joining us, we have a whole bunch of people that have signed up to watch this as a recording. This is the first day of school for a lot of people. So just know that if your video is on, you will be included potentially in the recording. Just a quick note on that. Tuan, do you want to go over our fun fact of today?
Of course. So today is Tuesday, August 11, 2020. Thank you all for being here. So on this date in 1909, the Arapaho became one of the first ships to use the SOS distress signal. And this is important to Unruly because SOS, it remains the standard international distress signal for ships and planes. And it's featured in one of our first Morse code activities in which we teach students how to write secret messages using Morse code. Mm-hmm. And splats. That's the important part.
All right. Well, especially because we're going to have a lot to cover today, I want to go ahead and get started. At any point, if you've got any questions, feel free to reach out in the chat. But again, if you're also watching this recording later and you also have any questions, you can always email us as well. All right. So thank you for joining us today. We are going to be talking about unruliness today. And we've got a bunch of different people from the Unruly team to talk about this. I'm Emily. I'm the education director here at Unruly.
I'm Tuan, and I'm a content creator as well as customer success. And I'm here to empower you and your students and to make sure that you're getting unruly in your classrooms.
And I'm Ryan. I'm also content creation. I was an escape room immersive experience designer, a maker, and a making instructor. And I started a little over a year ago helping out Unruly with content creation and design.
And Paul, Chief Creative Officer here at Unruly Studios. Brand and product design, keeping things unruly.
Brianne, you're muted.
I'm muted. Hi, I'm Brianne. I'm the founder and CEO of Unruly Studios and one of the inventors of the Splats, and excited to talk through some of the history of unruliness today.
My name is Aman Milner, also known as Dr. Splat. I am a professor of unruliness.
Awesome. Got a full house of Unruly today. All right. So you might be wondering why we're doing this session and why is it a part of our boot camp. And it's really from you all. So we get asked a lot by students and teachers why Unruly and just where did the name come from? Why did you decide to call yourselves that? So we're going to actually have a little bit of story time from Aman and Brianne to talk about this and where we came from.
All right, excited to get started. So I want to talk about where the idea came from initially for Unruly and for the Splats themselves, and then a bit through our history and how they came to be in schools. So first off, I had this initial idea. I studied cognitive science in undergrad and was always interested in sort of how kids learn. And while I was in college, I took a computer science course and realized in that course that I had actually learned beginner coding and computational thinking when I was 8 years old at school playing a game. I did not realize at the time when I was a kid that how much I had enjoyed it, but also how it would stick with me for 10 years and still help me later in that college computer science course and even further on in my career in technology. So I was pretty hooked on that, how that had impacted my own life. And I wanted to give that experience, like at the same time I was athletic. I was playing lacrosse in college at McGill, and I really found that like I loved sports and group activities. And so how could we kind of combine those things to make it really engaging and meet kids where they're at with how they like to play? So I had this initial idea on, can we combine movement with learning to code? And really it started with that, an idea that I started initially testing out directly with kids, because I wanted to make sure from the earliest days that if I was going to build something like this that I thought would be engaging, I wanted to actually make sure that kids would think it was engaging, and ultimately that it would be something that could spread really far and wide. So started off with a prototype. I'm not an engineer. And so initially with the idea, I wanted to test the experience for kids. So I went to a friend of mine was teaching second grade at the time in Roxbury, Massachusetts. So I went to her school after school one day with 7 of her kids, her students, and we tested this cardboard version that I had made out of, just poster board that I bought. And so I basically pretended to be the computer, and I flipped over the cards and pretended that it was this interactive touchscreen device on the floor. But I was getting the kids running around, jumping, and learning these early coding concepts. And so tested that out enough to know that it was engaging. They really liked it. I thought this idea had legs, but needed to learn a lot more. So first off, started cold calling after school programs and summer camps. And I wanted to learn what they were currently using to teach coding, what they did with STEM, and what could be better. And really just generally, if I had come out with this concept around adding movement in, like, would that be interesting to them? And they just loved it. They loved the idea of combining movement in. And so I thought that we could really go further with it. So that's when I decided to take the time and really build that first electronic prototype and start to take it off the ground, which is around the time when I met Aman, who's on the call, who was nearby at Olin College. I walked into his office with this prototype that I had built at a local makerspace in Somerville, Massachusetts, called the Artisans Asylum. So knowing that I wanted to build this into a company eventually and have it be something that could really scale and impact a lot of kids, I worked at the Artisans Asylum because I wanted to really understand the product from the beginning. So learned Arduino, learned soldering, and put this together, strung, I think it was 64 LED lights together. It looked like almost like a Christmas tree lights or something. And I put it all into this wooden structure that I had built out of wood from Home Depot. And that's what I walked into Aman's office with, Aman, who was early. Yeah.
But it's very robust. And it's also heavy. My office is on the 3rd floor. So I was very struck when she carried this up, and that she had it in her trunk at all times. I knew that she was very serious about what she was doing.
Absolutely. And at that time, the concept was really around, still around kind of building a lot of games ourselves, and building games and having kids play the games, and having the games sort of include computational thinking concepts and teach computational thinking in that way. What I didn't realize is when I started taking it out, and we brought it to a bunch of YMCA programs locally, summer camps, places like that, Girl Scouts as well. And when I would bring it out, I would sort of tell the kids what we were doing, what we were building, and then I would listen to them what they thought about it. And they would always raise their hand and say, could it do hopscotch? Could it do tic-tac-toe? They would have these ideas for all these games. And it would always be like ideas that I hadn't even thought of, or Naman hadn't thought of. Like, we would be like, wow, that is so creative. Like, it should do that. You're right. And then we started thinking, and we realized, like, we need to flip this idea on its head and ultimately open up the development and the creativity up to kids. They're going to do, create these amazing things with it. It should be a platform for them to create. And so that was sort of part of coming from the Scratch team as well, it was very in line with what we wanted to do. And so we started, along with the prototype of testing the physical prototype, started testing the concepts around game creation. Could kids invent these games, and what would their rules be, and how would they write those out? And so we have stacks probably about this high that I still have, and probably in the Unruly Museum at Olin, of just all these ideas that kids would create, and they would write out their rules for how it would work. And we could see that it was really becoming something that could be a platform for learning and creativity and collaboration. The other thing about this design here that we noticed was that we were talking to lots of teachers, and we talked to this one principal at least, who had said she really would love to see more products and more experiences for kids that got groups of kids working together, not just one-to-one. Like all the Chromebooks are one-to-one, all these other things at the school are one-to-one solo activities. And the more that they could incorporate group activities, large groups, small groups, anything collaborative, that was really what they were looking for right now. And so that's where with this, we had some collaboration, we had some ability for groups, but it was limited because it was a 4x4 space. Only 4 kids around that could fit on at one time. And so that's where we kind of made the decision around making it more modular and spreading it out around the room so that now it opens it up to any number of kids playing, and up to 30 kids at a time playing these games together, creating games for larger groups as well. So that came the, yeah, go ahead.
That's one of the things that in engineering practice, you iterate often and you try to learn from each thing that you build. So the splats that are in the screen there were one of the first prototypes that don't have exactly the same things that splats do today, but it had a lot of other features that we were interested in trying at the time, not just splitting up with the 4x4 grid that was an early prototype, but also checking how far they need to be from each other if we were going to ultimately make them wireless. We had very long cables. We had ways to test different color schemes, different brightness. If you figured out how hard a person was pressing. So we had to try a lot of different things in a lot of different settings with a lot of different young people and educators to see what types of activities and what kind of platform could support not just young people creating, because you saw the ideas on the paper, they could come up with ideas, but could they really realize them in groups while standing on their feet as opposed to being mostly in front of a computer? So these are sort of unknown questions. So to build mini prototypes had to go into finding out what could we do that would support the kind of learning that we now call unruly style learning, but make something that really makes this kind of play very approachable and robust and fun, to make sure that the ideas that people have, they could bring them to fruition without a frustrating experience.
Absolutely. And we ended up in the end, Aman and I had gone through 24 prototypes before bringing the splats ultimately to originally Kickstarter and then to market. And 24 different versions, but like you said, they were always testing something different. So some were testing, like this one was really the functionality, the full suite. It was like, can kids step on it? Can we make something durable enough? Can we connect it to a kid's block coding language that would allow to change the lights and colors and sounds? But there were some that were just testing what it looked like, just testing, could kids create with this? All these kinds of things. And so went through about 3,000 kids, parents, and educators that we tested this with before even bringing it into a classroom and bringing it into that first classroom and really testing that full experience, which we'll get to at the end, but even bringing it to market. So 3,000 kids, parents, and educators, we were always observing, always taking notes and listening to what they liked and seeing what they built with it, which became ultimately Unruly. And we have a brief video of this prototype in action, which you can see we had the engagement there, we had the actual experience built, but we were still early days, still testing out and iterating.
Love it.
So an important part of the process of coming to how splats currently are was that the team had different versions of people that were all learning from each other and sort of modeling the unruly learning together, where there's different parts of the processes, the bringing together, the prototype, the engaging with young people, the working in different settings, coming up with the creative content. So these are all of the things that we modeled learning together so that we could have a very fun, playful process in creating a process that would allow people to have playful programming fun too. So there's a lot of credit for some great collaborators and students along the way that helped build the Unruly team as we see it today.
And this was part of that same day at a library in Newton, Massachusetts, where we were also even testing beyond that, but what it would look like and what would be most fun, approachable, like engage that kind of experimental side of kids and get them being unruly and getting ready to create their own rules. And so we actually surveyed this day, we surveyed 75 kids and their parents to get the ultimate final design of Unruly Splats, which you can see in the next slide. But yeah, had all kids kind of vote and decide, and ended up ultimately with what we have today, which is the splats that you see with the ability to hold them with that little hole in them, and the ultimate splat design, which we had to triple and quadruple check through lots of different places to make sure we had our own unique splat and that it wasn't any kind of copyright of any other other splats that were already out there. And so lots of different, even beyond this image here, but like lots of different iterations that went into ultimately what brought us to the splat that you see today. But getting feedback from kids all along the way. And this is actually an image from our first ever school pilot that we did while we were at one of the maker fairs we were testing splats at. We had a teacher from Somerville, Massachusetts come up to us, and he just was really enthralled with what we were doing and knew how much it could impact kids, and he thought it could really get kids engaged in STEM that weren't already interested in STEM at his school. So he was like begging us to come do a pilot. We were like, well, we're not on the market yet. We're just like early, but we ended up deciding to do it early. And so we have at this point, the splats were battery powered, but they had a little battery pack sticking outside the left side of it. So weren't completely Bluetooth yet, but we were able to do this pilot with 5th and 6th grade students in Somerville over the course of a couple of months, the last quarter of school. And this was our first time really testing that full experience beyond just the product experience and the app, but actually testing out, what does a lesson with splats look like? What does it feel like? And like looking at how we would structure it and how we could sort of get the engagement that we wanted with kids. And we were really observing for the first time this with a large group setting in a school setting, and seeing that there's kind of a buzz in the room when splats are happening, and that you're seeing kids grab their laptop and walk across the room to tell another kid what they're working on and to show. And they were kind of, what we noticed here for the first time was they were really naturally forming groups around the splats, and so like forming a group to create a game together. And while we always wanted that to happen, we realized we didn't need to do much to make that happen. It was really just happening naturally. So every time we did these, I mean, Aman, you and I and several other team members would go to these sessions, and we would just have some of us teaching, some of us watching, and really just observing what was happening in the classroom. And it was a really successful pilot, yeah.
The sessions had a lot of bidirectional learning, where we got to see how people in the classrooms were managing the students, and in different spaces in the libraries or the gym or in a classroom setting. And they also got to observe how we could change the rules of the classroom, where we weren't needing to adhere to any certain set of this standard has to connect to our lesson today. We had the ability to come and engage in a different manner with the young people, and not have what they were used to, and we can have them up and out of their desks around. We could reorganize the space. So like there's a rhythm that happens during the school day, and they were also willing to, for a certain amount of the day, let us change that up and engage in the ways that we thought would be conducive to unruly learning in the classrooms, the libraries, or other spaces. And so we got to learn from them about what works in the schools from the practitioners, and they also got to see what we envisioned could be a place where all the young people are inside of the desk, and the desks are pushed around the outside of the classroom, and see the value of that, and just have great conversations and experiments with understanding both sides and what needs to come to make sure that the students are learning, and they are also changing the rules and realizing that the space can be owned by them for a little bit. And that was one of the times when we started really embodying unruliness and sort of trying to figure out and codify that in a classroom space. So this picture is one of the times where we were starting to really own our name, and how do we make that translate into school settings?
Oh no. Reload. One moment. Technical difficulties. Oh, here, I'll put it on this page so you can still see.
I love the show anyway, kind of like do it at your own risk.
Oh,
That was our first durability testing too, was at that Somerville pilot. I remember we had the kids try to destroy the splats so we could see if there were any weak areas and things like that. And lots of unruliness there. But yeah, that is, as Aman said, like that is where the Unruly name, we kind of grew into it and noticed that as we grew the product, as we iterated it, it just became more and more about kids making the rules, challenging the rules, doing STEM differently, and engaging different kids into STEM and making it really approachable.
do you want to speak a little bit about how we actually got the name Unruly while I figure out what's going on with the slide deck?
Sure. Yeah, so the name came originally, we were under a different name way back, knowing that, you know, we kind of put the name down one night saying, okay, well, we have to present about this tomorrow, but we will update it later when we find the right name. And so we had Jump Smart for a very long time under all of our prototypes. And then ultimately, I knew we wanted a new name, but we just couldn't come to it. We were having all these brainstorm sessions. We were like, it's got to be, you know, it definitely needs to show that kids can make the rules. It has to be different. It needs to kind of be fun and energetic and things like that. We had all these rules about it, and we definitely wanted it to be something that could appeal to boys and girls alike. So we wanted it to really be something that would be gender neutral in the space as well, and attract both boys and girls. So along with that, we at that point, I saw this contest that was happening in Boston called the Brandathon, where all these big branding agencies that typically work with big companies like Jeep, IBM, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, stuff like that, they do their branding. They were doing a competition where they rebranded 12 early stage startups. So I applied for it and we got in, and we were able to, throughout the weekend, we told them all the things we wanted in a name, and they came up with Unruly Games for us. And then we decided after looking at it that we wanted to change it slightly from Unruly Games to Unruly Studios, because studios showed the other realms of where we hit, so around music, art, things like that. So we ultimately went with Unruly Studios, but it all came from that competition. And the funny part of it is that we actually shouldn't have gotten into the competition at all. We were early at that point of that competition. We were pre-revenue, pre-product. We had not gone on the market yet. We didn't have any customers yet. And the competition rules specifically stated you could not be in the competition if you didn't have active customers, if you didn't have a product in the market and you didn't have revenue. But I was just like, you know what? This is such an incredible idea that it's going to impact so many kids, and we already have done so much work. I'm just going to ignore that even says that. And I applied anyway, and I really pushed, and I think I even called the person running the competition, and I got them to let us in. And that's how we kind of came up with the name. So by ignoring one of the rules of the competition, we got in and ultimately became Unruly.
Wow. That's amazing. I particularly like the story about how we even got our name was Unruly. I think that's the craziest thing. Awesome. So that's the story of just where Unruly came from. And to bring that more down onto the actual classroom level, it's been something that we've seen from the beginning, and it's been something that whenever we've been working with educators, we've really noticed from the beginning. But a few months ago, I guess probably longer than a few months ago now, maybe a year ago, we tried to actually put some words to what unruliness meant. And so we worked with some of our teachers to come up with a declaration of unruliness, which I've got up on the screen here. So I'm just going to run through it really quickly. And a lot of these things you just saw. So just seeing all those, all the different examples of kids and all the learning that they were doing. This is where we got it from. So the first thing that you have to solemnly swear to not be so solemn, and to take fun seriously, and to have fun. And that's something that's been super important from the beginning in creating an unruly learning space for sure. having high expectations for what we can create. The we is a really important piece. Brianna and Aman spoke about this quite a bit, but we've been, like, ever since splats have existed, they've existed in groups. And so creating things together has always been an important piece. Sharing splats and unruly creations across different spaces has also been important from the beginning. So that could be your classroom, that could be your building, that could be plastering it all over the internet. Just making sure that you're sharing what you make, because again, you're making it together, and a game is no fun if nobody gets to play it. This next point about ideas driving the bus and not the splats is really just about not being limited. If you came to our game creation webinar or watched that recording, we spoke a little bit about this, but not being limited by what the splat actually is, and really just letting your ideas pull you. So what a game might be, or what your game might involve, might be something that you've never really thought about. And we really see that. We've seen that with students really just from the beginning. This next point about classroom roles has been something that has been evolving quite a bit over time. But finding different ways for different students to contribute their unruliness is a really big piece. Every kid has a different thing that they can contribute when making a game or just building something together. And so really taking advantage of that, I think, has been, when we see that, it's always super positive. The next point is about allowing your classroom to transform into whatever you want it to be. Paul might have some stuff that he needs to add in on this piece. But we talked about this in the game creation webinar as well. But really letting your classroom transform into, you know, it might be a medieval castle or a lava pit or whatever you want it to be. That might be for your game itself, or just what you need in order to create that creative space in your brain. Just jumping. So really just being active is the next part. So really just like jump on your splats. It's important. And whenever we've seen students create the craziest, most fun things, sometimes it came from a really basic place. One of our most popular games is Race in Place, which is really just stomp on the splats as many times as you can. And it might seem sort of silly, but there's been so many different versions of Race in Place that have evolved, of you're running from different things, you're running to different things, you have different things you have to hop over. So really just start wherever you need to start, and it might just be with jumping. Welcoming lots of different unruly sounds. So our most popular sounds, if you actually look at the analytics of our blocks, fun fact, are the animal sounds. So that's why we've got meows in here. And really just remember to be silly. So don't try to say unruly backwards. It's really difficult.
All right, so I get to talk a little bit about the thinking behind our content. I get to be a little nerdy with you right now, so that's pretty exciting for me. But we fundamentally, to our core, believe in learning through play, and there are many studies that show the long-term benefits of learning through play, such as fostering effective communication, growing your social skills, developing cognitive and motor skills, encouraging confidence, and nurturing creativity. And we think about these qualities a lot when we're creating content for you and for the students. So when we say unruly, we also like to think about a controlled type of chaos. So if you think about playful learning as a continuum, games follow closely behind direct instruction in terms of impact on student learning. And so we also try to remember that not all games are created equal. We want to make sure that our games are designed in a way that there are scaffolds and resources for both the educator and the student, and that the kids are aware of the rules and the constraints for play and the purpose of the play. So that goes hand in hand with ZPD, or zone of proximal development. And I won't go too deeply into this, even though I crave to do so. I know you as educators are very familiar with this concept, but it's basically the inner circle A is what students are already capable of doing. It's not asking too much of them cognitively. And then B is the outer ring, and it's stuff that is so high level or maybe too advanced for them cognitively, and so they have difficulty learning it even with support from adults. And so what we want is that sweet spot, that zone of proximal development in which there's gradual release, there are scaffolds, and there also is a lot of independence, because we truly believe in children having agency in how they play and how they learn and the choices that they make. So again, unruliness is this controlled chaos. It doesn't mean that anything goes, because not all play is learning. And on the other hand, not all learning is play. We, again, want that sweet spot in which children feel supported and teachers feel empowered. They feel they're in control of the situation. They feel like they're in control of the content that's being learned, but kids get to feel in control of the choices that they're making and the pace in which they are learning. So again, gradual release is crucial. And in order to help with that gradual release, we've created a lot of resources that I'm going to do a quick overview of for you. So we are constantly coming out with new content, and that content is informed by the feedback that you give to us, because unfortunately we don't get to be in the classrooms with you. I'm really sorry for this train noise. It's kind of the unruliness. But for educators, we have personalized onboarding for if you're new to Unruly. We have presentations that we've created into a handy dandy PowerPoint presentation, which is especially helpful now that a lot of learning is hybrid and remote, and it's a brand new frontier of learning. We have lessons with scaffolded suggestions. We have webinars such as these that are, if you cannot attend directly, we record them, we make them available to you. And for students, there are like fun little things like contests with Crash, and Crash is our gorilla uncle, gorilla friend mascot. But Crash is an important part of our unruliness, our learning, and our having fun. And he loves to have contests with students. He's always trying to get them to be their craziest but most creative selves. We have lots of games available for download, so the kids can start with the code itself, or they can start by making the code. And it, again, is their agency and their choice. And we have lots of activities that sort of speak to different types of interests, such as art and things that call for being athletic, things that call for just being very creative, and we try to meet all those needs. And in between, you're going to see that a lot of our content is for both the educators and the students to feel empowered. And again, this is like a new frontier of learning. So we feel more so than ever that SPLAX is really poised to become an integral part of learning. It can be used in an interdisciplinary manner. You can use it for math, reading, writing, art, PE, all across the board, because your creativity is limitless, and therefore we feel like SPLAX is unlimited. And so we want to bring that play to your school, to your home, and to the community. And we've created a lot of activities that both are vehicles for children's independence in learning, but also for playing together as well, and then playing together as a class. And Ryan can speak a little bit more about some of the resources we've created for playing together as a class, now that we can't always be together.
Yeah, we sort of adjusted how we build things really from the base up to more work with the app, work with any sort of learning environment we end up with nowadays.
Yeah. So if you all are familiar with, some of you might be watching this and be super familiar with our very early lessons. Some of that Brianne might have even showed you from our Somerville days. So they were very traditional lessons in that you were working together as a class to build some sort of project. And these, when Ryan said that they're flipped in that they're step by step, almost like an IKEA booklet in terms of how you're building this larger project. And there's lots of different ways you can do it. So you can do it in synchronous time, where you might be all together on a video call. You can do it in asynchronous time, but still be having groups be working together, all different ways. But these activities that are on the screen, they're really different in that we had to think about, how do you play together whenever you're apart? I think it's a different thing sometimes.
Yeah, and these are some resources that are more teacher facing, resources we made specifically to help teachers in terms of tackling some of the new obstacles, such as teaching SEL in the classroom and making sure everyone is getting that social emotional learning, even though we're not together. And so we've created games that specifically address some of those concerns. And we also have lots of suggestions and notes in terms of playing while maintaining social distance, and playing while not everyone gets to be together.
All right.
Yeah. I mean, and then this is just a really fun example that I personally really love, in which you can sort of see the results of allowing this level of unruliness while also understanding that there are boundaries and giving children agency. And this is just the result of all those wonderful things coming together. And Emily can speak more a little bit about it.
Yeah, so I'm gonna actually play it first, and then I'll ramble on a little bit. But this game is called Elephant Finder, and the rules that the students are going to be talking through are also on the screen here, and they wrote these as well.
Hey, girl.
1, 2, 3. So we made Elephant Finder. So one flat will do a sound, and they're all in partners, and they have to figure out and agree which one it will be. So splat one, everybody is in, and the people that don't get the lit up splat, they're out, and the people that are in there with their partner, they have to split up and do it again, and the last person that is there, or the last pair that's there, wins. And here's an example.
Get an overview about what that.
It has a delay 10 seconds, so you have to wait. Because that one lit up, so number 2 lit up, so that group would have to split up, and then whoever wins that is the winner of that group.
All right. So that game is one that we reference a whole lot for a couple of different reasons. This game is actually the base of our Intro to Coding pack. So our Intro to Coding pack that's up on our portal, we actually built it based off of this particular game. And I went and visited that classroom probably 5 or 6 times throughout the semester. It was really unguided. And so students were really just exploring. We might be doing different groupings, and we might see and explore different particular concepts. But a lot of the learning that happened, especially in terms of Elephant Finder and how students arrived at this end game, was really just through exploration and unruliness. And so that's how we actually structured our Intro to Coding pack. So this one we talk about a lot just because it has a lot of meaning for us in terms of we really wanted to model, okay, how to introduce our block coding language. We wanted to see how would you do it naturally? So how did students naturally explore? So that's the story of Elephant Finder. And then we have a couple of minutes here. I'm so close to 45 minutes. This is amazing. We had talked a little bit before about unruliness and about play, and this is something that as a team, even today, we were talking about the role of play in learning. And so I welcome you to discuss this question with your colleagues now if you can, but if you're watching this recording, to really just talk about it. But the Unruly team that's on here, do you have any thoughts? Did any of you disagree with Tuan's statements?
Yeah, I mean, I think this came about just because I was genuinely curious, from Tuan's perspective there, because where we had one of the previous slides said not all play is learning, not all learning is play. And from my perspective, I don't know, I view it as like kind of any type of play or interaction while you're playing is a form of learning. And I know, and that might also just be coming from like even a creative perspective too, just like, sort of how I explore and even creating experiences for Unruly and even the Unruly app. Yeah, but I don't know. I'm just curious to see what other people in the team think. But I just think like even like minor interactions, picking up on sort of like, a facial expression that somebody makes in a game of tag when they're trying to like kind of fake you out one way and go another way, or just kind of, I guess that gets sort of into, really what is or how do you define learning? Yeah, I don't know. Anybody else on the team have any thoughts here?
I love it when people disagree with me. It's a great way to learn.
There are all types of learning, and learning can take different shapes. And we can talk about, the opposite of unruly, which would be ruly learning, which is, a classroom that has desks all in a row, and there's content that everyone has to know to be able to report back in the same fashion, using the same notation on demand, right? So like that is a style of learning that you can see in several classrooms. And there's some things that people think that type of setting is very conducive to, that's the best type of learning for, say, early math or something like that. So it exists for a reason. There's also a type of learning that you might call unruly learning, where it's not the information delivery from one sage on the stage just to filling up and banking. There's a source of information, and I'm gonna withdraw this information and deposit it into each of your heads, right? So there's different models where there are two heads that are thinking all kind of different things, and they get to come together and stand up, push those desks back, come up with an idea and realize it and make it concrete with hands-on. And that is a slightly different type of learning. So in play, there's there's different styles of learning that play can produce, because there's some play, like you can take a quiz and can make it very fun. And it can be like, flashcards, like, oh, quickly, memorize all these. Oh, and there's a lot of play that can be in that kind of session, and there's learning, but it might map more to one style of learning, like just memorizing certain facts and things like that. But you can make it playful, and you can make it map to that kind of learning. I think the kind of play that we'd like to explore that comes from Brianne's stories about tag and active things is that we want to make the kind of play that's there, that is collaborative, that's on your feet, that also has so many active components. We also want to make sure that learning that is, particularly in the STEM areas, that hasn't traditionally and historically been done in that format. So I think we can make play learning in a domain that, a kind of active play, to be learning in a domain that wasn't where it came from naturally, with engineering coming out of the Army Corps of Engineers, and very hierarchical, right? So we say, well, let's do the opposite, and can we have a particular kind of learning done in active ways that's more collaborative and with less rules and structures in the Army Corps of Engineers. So I think there's different learnings and there's different types of play. So we're just playing with two different styles that haven't been traditionally connected.
I think of it so much too as like, the more with splats and just with all these experiences, like the more we can get kids to form new memories, like that's where they're really, the learning impacts them in later years. And so I feel like that's where having something funny or really unexpected happen, it can form a memory when you're with other people, and that can be a really long lasting piece. And that's where, like, I think the role of play and in these games, like Aman said, like, or in tag, like so much unexpected things happen in tag, and you might have a specific tag memory that was because of something specific that happened, or a mistake that you made, or when you fell, and like things like that mistakes that happen. I feel like the memories formed end up becoming the lessons learned, for sure. And that's sort of where all of this comes from, on the experiential learning side, and putting kids through it, and like letting them create and form their own memories through that creation process too.
We just had a dog join the call, and somebody might remember the first time their dog ran into their game of tag, and then it became whoever the dog was chasing was it. Right? A fun memory.
And I spent many years trying to have people recapture some of those like most fleeting moments of childhood, right? Like these little experiences that maybe you played this game, or you solved this thing, came up with this idea, and your whole group ended up doing this thing. So the experiential learning, it's something that people move away from as they get older, and we do all these things to try and get back to that. And I think it's like structuring learning in a way that lets kids explore that in a very open way can be lasting, can be very powerful for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, it's an instinct, right? There's no question about it that, you even saw in the video there with the elephant game, right? And they were tapping into something that spoke to them. It was very like creative expression experience for them. And in that, just talking about kind of the technical part of how you make and control that, where the kid was just kind of casually like, oh, there's a delay block here. But what's a delay block by itself? It's just a stoppage of time. It's kind of boring, right? But in the context here, it allowed them to create that experience to play out as they saw it in their head. And that's where I think like the powerful combination really comes together here is, you know, this instinct and this desire to like express yourself in a way that is kind of, you know, hopefully a safe and controlled chaos maybe environment where kids, you know, can bring out these expressions and try to articulate those expressions to their friends. And if it catches on, that's a game that sticks and they play together. And yeah, so I don't know. I mean, to me, that's sort of like when I first met Brianna, that was the one piece that really, really connected very strongly with me, is that I've been for all my career creating experiences for kids, whether it was like linear, narrative television, or even in the ed tech space. But this was, to me, like a powerful tool that you know, spoke to kind of, you know, my inner child and my desire to always like create and imagine and play games, and just the ability here to be able to do that in a way that I think is also like, you know, kids are, it's just sort of their language now. They understand the digital space. They understand being able to like control things in their house, right? With things like Alexa or Siri, like they understand that language of like control through like digital media. So being able to combine these two things together, and then the physically active aspect of the play is super powerful. So yeah, I don't know, I'm tying that back to like, I think for me, I'm standing by it. I think like any expression of play or any moment in play is a learning opportunity. It's just where on the spectrum do you put that in terms of like, how do you define learning, I guess. But
well, and I think you can see that across our team of what everybody's different responses were. I mean, for me specifically, I've spent at least like most of my career designing, specifically learning things in science and in STEM. And so I'm always thinking about, okay, well, what are the different concepts and what are the different things that you need to build? And sometimes so void of fun. Like it's like you're just like, you're trying to find the fun in anything. And so on one hand, I'm very much of, you know, having high expectations and making sure that you can really make, like, the concepts are important oftentimes, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes there are different times and there are different spaces where you might not want to be focusing on, you know, like variables, and instead focusing on how to interact with each other. And there's a different like space for all of that. So I don't have the answer. I don't know if any of us do, and you and we can all have our own opinions. It doesn't really matter. But I do think it's super interesting in just how all of us answered.
There's something to learn about using your imagination, learning how to use your imagination. And you talked about the delay block. We have to design a system together as a team. We all talk about what kind of blocks do we put in front of people that will help them unlock their imagination. And I can only imagine having a delay block that doesn't have a drop down of a certain predefined set of, you know, 1 second, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, you know, like if you leave it blank, you can imagine someone thinking about how long would it take for an elephant to walk somewhere, and then how long do I have to delay? Should I have a lot of zeros there? You know, like, so like leaving the delay block something that you can type into. You can see imagination is running wild, especially in a context where they're thinking about an elephant going and hiding and maybe catching his breath before it does another roar.
We'll have to continue this philosophical conversation at our happy hour, which is happening this Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Yes, this Thursday, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So if you want to have some deep philosophical questions and, you know, disagree with us, definitely come. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot them to us in the chat right now. I know many of you are going to be watching this on a recording. So if you do have any questions, I will make sure to type my email into the chat. It's just my name at unruly-studios.com. Same for everybody else that's on this call today. And more shameless plug time, we're having an SEL Splats Chat on Twitter tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So make sure to check that out as well. You can just search Splats Chat and it should come right up. All right, that's all we got, folks. Anything else to add, team? Resounding silence.
Fun.
I think we did it.
Awesome. Well, I will be sticking around for a couple more minutes if you've got any questions. But I will put our emails in the chat as well. So whenever you're watching this, you can email. But I hope this was helpful. And have a great rest of your day, everybody. Whatever day it is.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody, thanks.
Bye, guys.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye. Have a good one.
Bye, everybody. Emails in the chat. Bye, all.